The dust swirled in lazy spirals as Jack Morrison rode into Cedar Falls, his weathered boots touching the ground with practiced ease. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the main street, painting the wooden buildings in shades of amber and rust. His horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Belle, snorted softly as they approached the hitching post outside Sarah's saloon. Jack adjusted his worn leather hat and surveyed the town. Cedar Falls was like countless others he'd passed through, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to hope and habit in the unforgiving desert. The general store, the church with its modest bell tower, the sheriff's office with its warped wooden sign, and the saloon that served as the town's beating heart. "Welcome to Cedar Falls, stranger," called out Sheriff Thomas Bradley from his chair outside the jail. The portly man's uniform was stained with sweat and tobacco juice, his badge dulled by neglect. "You planning on staying long?" Jack tipped his hat respectfully. "Just passing through, Sheriff. Looking for a hot meal and a place to rest my horse." "Sarah runs a clean establishment," Bradley said, gesturing toward the saloon. "Just mind yourself around the local color. We got ourselves a madman who wanders the streets, bothering decent folks." As if summoned by the sheriff's words, a figure emerged from the alley beside the general store. The man was tall and gaunt, his white hair and beard unkempt, his clothes little more than rags. Elias, known to everyone simply as the crazy old fool, shuffled down the street muttering to himself. "There he is now!" Bradley spat, rising from his chair. "Elias, get on out of here before you scare off paying customers." The old man paused, his deep blue eyes scanning the street before settling on Jack. For a moment, their gazes met, and Jack felt something stir within him, a recognition he couldn't quite name. But before he could process the feeling, a group of townsfolk had gathered. "Crazy old bat," sneered Reverend Michael Stone, his black suit immaculate despite the heat. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. But sometimes I wonder if he's testing our patience with such unfortunate souls." Maria Santos, the baker's wife, watched from her doorway, her hands flour-dusted from the day's work. She clutched her apron tightly, her kind eyes reflecting a mixture of sympathy and fear. "He's harmless," she whispered to her neighbor, but loud enough for Jack to hear. "Harmless or not, he's bad for business," said the store owner, emerging with a broom. "Scares the children, makes the women nervous. We've told him 100 times to stay out of the main street." Jack dismounted and tied Belle to the post, watching as the crowd's attention focused on the old man. Elias stood perfectly still, his weathered face showing no emotion as insults were hurled his way. There was something about his stillness that commanded respect, even as the townspeople showed him none. "You hungry, old man?" Jack called out, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. The street fell silent. Sheriff Bradley's jaw went slack, and Reverend Stone's practiced smile faltered. Sarah Collins appeared in the saloon doorway, her emerald dress catching the light, her intelligent green eyes studying the scene with interest. "I said, 'Are you hungry?'" Jack repeated, walking toward Elias with measured steps. The old man's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time he spoke clearly. I am." Jack reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a wrapped piece of bread he'd been saving for his journey. It wasn't much, dark, dense bread that travelers relied on, but it was clean and filling. He extended it toward Elias. "Here, a man shouldn't go hungry." The crowd watched in stunned silence as Elias accepted the bread with trembling hands. His fingers, though dirty from living rough, moved with surprising grace as he unwrapped the cloth. He looked up at Jack, and for a moment his eyes seemed to hold depths of wisdom that contradicted his ragged appearance. "Thank you, brother," Elias said, his voice stronger now. "Your kindness will not be forgotten." Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Now listen here, stranger. We don't encourage that kind of behavior in this town. You give him food and he'll never leave. Every man deserves basic human dignity," Jack replied calmly, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Not as a threat, but as a reminder of his capabilities. "Where I come from, we don't let folks starve in the streets." "Where you come from doesn't matter here," Bradley shot back. "We have our ways of dealing with undesirables." Sarah stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "That's enough, Tom. The man showed Christian charity, nothing more." She turned to Jack, extending her hand. "Sarah Collins, welcome to Cedar Falls." Jack accepted her handshake, noting the strength in her grip and the intelligence in her eyes. "Jack Morrison, pleased to meet you, ma'am." "Come inside," Sarah said. "First drinks on the house for any man with that kind of heart." As they walked toward the saloon, Jack glanced back at Elias. The old man was carefully rewrapping the remaining bread, his movements deliberate and respectful. Their eyes met once more, and Elias nodded slowly, a gesture that seemed to carry more weight than a simple thanks. The crowd began to disperse, muttering among themselves about the stranger who dared to treat the town madman like a human being. Sheriff Bradley spat into the dust and retreated to his office, while Reverend Stone shook his head in disapproval before heading toward the church. Inside the saloon, the atmosphere was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of whiskey. A few patrons sat at scattered tables, their conversations quiet and purposeful. Sarah moved behind the bar with practiced efficiency, her red hair catching the lamplight. "You're not from around here," she observed, pouring Jack a glass of whiskey. "No, ma'am. Been traveling for some time now." "What brings you to Cedar Falls?" Jack sipped his drink, considering his words carefully. "Looking for work. Heard there might be opportunities in the territory." Sarah studied him with those keen green eyes. "You seem like a decent man, Jack Morrison, but you should know what you did out there showing kindness to Elias. It won't win you any friends in this town." "I'm not looking for friends," Jack replied. "Just doing what's right." "And what's right isn't always what's popular," Sarah said with a knowing smile. "Elias has been the town pariah for as long as anyone can remember. Some say he came here years ago, already touched by madness. Others claim he lost his mind gradually, talking to himself, acting strangely. What do you say?" Sarah paused, her expression thoughtful. "I say there's more to that old man than meets the eye. He's never caused real trouble, never hurt anyone, but people fear what they don't understand." Jack nodded, finishing his drink. "I've seen enough fear in my time. It makes people cruel." "You speak from experience." "We all do, in our own way." As the evening wore on, Jack found himself a room above the saloon and settled in for the night. But sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of the old man's eyes, those deep, knowing eyes that seemed to see straight through to a man's soul. Outside, Elias sat in the shadows behind the general store, carefully eating the bread Jack had given him. Each bite was savored, and when he finished, he folded the cloth with the same care one might use to handle a precious relic. "Soon," he whispered to the darkness. "Very soon." In the distance, barely visible against the night sky, a lone rider appeared on the ridge overlooking Cedar Falls. Then another and another. By dawn, they would number in the hundreds, all waiting for a signal from the man the town had dismissed as a madman. But for now, Cedar Falls slept peacefully, unaware that a simple act of kindness had set in motion events that would change everything. Jack woke to the sound of horses. Not the usual few that clip-clopped through Cedar Falls, but the deep, rhythmic thunder of many hooves moving in unison. He moved to the window and peered through the dusty glass, his eyes widening at the sight that greeted him. The main street was lined with riders, their horses perfectly still, their riders even more so. They wore dark cloaks that seemed to absorb the early morning light, and their faces were hidden beneath hoods. There had to be at least 50 of them, possibly more, arranged in perfect formation along both sides of the street. Jack dressed quickly and made his way downstairs, where he found Sarah already behind the bar, her face pale but determined. She was loading a shotgun with steady hands. "How long have they been out there?" Jack asked. "Since before dawn," Sarah replied, not looking up from her task. They haven't said a word, haven't moved, except to breathe. It's like they're waiting for something. Through the saloon's batwing doors, Jack could see more riders continuing to arrive. They took positions with military precision, filling every available space along the street. The townspeople were beginning to emerge from their homes, their faces showing a mixture of fear and confusion. Sheriff Bradley stumbled out of his office, his uniform hastily thrown on, his badge crooked. He approached the nearest rider with false bravado. "What's the meaning of this? Who's in charge here?" The rider remained silent, unmoving as a statue. Bradley's voice rose in pitch. "I'm the sheriff of this town. I demand to know what you want." Still nothing. The rider's horse shifted slightly, but the man himself might as well have been carved from stone. "This is about yesterday," Sarah said quietly, "about what you did for Elias." "Giving a man bread doesn't warrant this kind of response," Jack replied. But even as he said it, he felt a cold certainty in his gut that this was indeed connected to his simple act of kindness. Reverend Stone appeared in the street, his black suit making him look like a crow among the dark-cloaked riders. "In the name of the Lord, I command you to speak. What do you want with our town?" One of the riders slowly turned his head toward the Reverend, and though his face remained hidden, something in that simple gesture made Stone stumble backward, his usual confidence evaporating. More townspeople gathered, their whispers creating a nervous buzz that contrasted sharply with the absolute silence of the riders. Maria Santos clutched her children close, her dark eyes wide with fear. The store owner peered out from behind his partly closed door, ready to slam it shut at the first sign of trouble. "There's got to be 300 of them now," someone whispered. "More coming from the east," another voice added. Jack pushed through the batwing doors and stepped onto the saloon's porch. The sight that greeted him was both magnificent and terrifying. The riders stretched as far as he could see down the main street, their formation perfect, their discipline absolute. These weren't bandits or drifters. They moved and positioned themselves like a trained army. "Looking for someone?" Jack called out, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. For a moment nothing happened. Then, from somewhere in the crowd of townspeople, a figure emerged. It was Elias, but he looked different. His posture was straighter, his movements more purposeful. He still wore his ragged clothes, but there was something about him that commanded attention. "They're looking for justice," Elias said, his voice carrying with unexpected authority. "And they've found it." Sheriff Bradley turned toward the old man, his face flushing with anger. This is your doing, isn't it? You brought these what, Sheriff?" Elias asked, his blue eyes fixed on Bradley with an intensity that made the lawman step back. "These men who've come to see what kind of town Cedar Falls really is." "Now see here," Reverend Stone interjected, finding his voice again. "We're God-fearing people in this town. We don't need outsiders coming here to judge us." Elias turned his gaze to the Reverend, and Stone's words died in his throat. "God-fearing," Elias repeated softly. "Tell me, Reverend, when was the last time you fed a hungry man? When did you last offer shelter to someone who needed it?" The church provides for the needy," Stone stammered. "Does it?" Elias asked. "I've been hungry in your streets for 3 years, Reverend. I've slept in the cold, been driven away from doorsteps, called names by children who learned cruelty from their parents. Where was your Christian charity then?" The crowd began to murmur, some defending the Reverend, others falling silent as they remembered their own actions toward the old man. Jack watched the scene unfold with growing understanding. This wasn't random. It was planned, purposeful. "You're not mad at all, are you?" Jack said, stepping down from the porch. Elias turned to him, and for the first time since Jack had arrived in Cedar Falls, he saw the old man smile. "Madness is a matter of perspective, Jack Morrison. To some, kindness in a cruel world might seem like madness." "Who are you?" Jack asked. "I am who I've always been," Elias replied. "The question is, Who are all of you? As if responding to some invisible signal, the riders began to move, not toward the townspeople, but into a tighter formation. They were surrounding the main street, creating a circle that encompassed the saloon, the church, the sheriff's office, and the general store. The circle was closing, but slowly, deliberately. "What do you want?" Sheriff Bradley demanded, his voice cracking with fear. "I want to tell you a story," Elias said, his voice carrying to every corner of the street, about a man who came to a town looking for nothing more than basic human kindness, about how that town treated him, about how they mocked him, scorned him, drove him away from their doors. "You're talking about yourself," Maria Santos said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Am I?" Elias asked. "Or am I talking about every stranger who's ever needed help, every person who's been different, who's been judged by appearances rather than character?" The riders continued their slow, methodical positioning. Jack counted them now. There had to be close to 500, maybe more. They moved with the precision of a military unit, but there was something else about them, something that made his skin prickle with unease. "Yesterday," Elias continued, "one man showed me kindness. One man saw past the rags and the reputation to the human being underneath. That man gave me bread, not because he expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do." Jack felt all eyes turn to him, but he kept his gaze fixed on Elias. There was something building here, something that went beyond a simple morality lesson. "That act of kindness," Elias said, "was noted, recorded, remembered, just as every act of cruelty has been noted, recorded, and remembered." "You're talking nonsense," Sheriff Bradley said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Elias asked. "Tell me, Sheriff, do you remember the night you kicked me while I slept behind the jail? Do you remember calling me names, telling me I was worthless, that I should just die and save everyone the trouble?" Bradley's face went white. I was drunk. I didn't mean..." "Didn't mean what? Didn't mean to reveal who you really are when you thought no one was watching." The circle of riders was nearly complete now, their horses standing perfectly still, their riders like dark sentinels. The townspeople found themselves trapped not by violence, but by the simple, overwhelming presence of judgment. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Elias looked at her, and his expression softened slightly. "Now, Sarah Collins, we see what kind of people you really are. We see if kindness can flourish in a place where cruelty has taken root." "And if it can't?" Jack asked. Elias's smile faded, and in its place was something harder, more resolute. "Then justice will be served." The sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the street. The riders remained motionless, their presence a constant reminder that this was no ordinary day in Cedar Falls. And in the center of it all, the man they had called a madman stood tall, his true nature finally revealed. The reckoning had begun. The tension in Cedar Falls was suffocating. The 500 riders maintained their perfect formation, creating an impenetrable circle around the town's heart. Sheriff Bradley paced nervously, his hand hovering near his gun, while Reverend Stone clutched his Bible with white knuckles. Jack studied the scene with growing unease. These weren't ordinary men. Their discipline was too perfect, their coordination too precise. And Elias... The transformation in the old man was remarkable. Gone was the shuffling gait and confused mumbling. In its place stood someone who commanded absolute respect from an army of followers. 3 years, Elias said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent street. 3 years I walked among you, observing, learning, testing the character of this town. 3 years of being spat upon, kicked, ridiculed, and driven away. Testing us? Maria Santos asked, her voice trembling. What kind of test? The oldest test of all, Elias replied. How do you treat those who cannot help you? How do you behave when you think no one important is watching? One of the riders, distinguishable by additional markings on his dark cloak, moved forward. He dismounted with fluid grace and approached Elias, removing his hood to reveal a face marked by a long scar running from his left temple to his jaw. His eyes were grey as storm clouds, and his bearing was unmistakably military. "Captain Gabriel," Elias said by way of introduction, "my second in command." Gabriel bowed slightly to Elias, then turned to address the crowd. "Citizens of Cedar Falls, you stand before judgment. For 3 years you have been tested, and your responses have been recorded." "Recorded by whom?" Sheriff Bradley demanded, trying to regain some authority. "Who gives you the right to judge us?" "The same authority that gives you the right to wear that badge," Gabriel replied calmly. "The difference is we've earned our authority through service to justice, not through political appointment." Jack stepped forward. "What exactly are you?" Gabriel's grey eyes fixed on him. "We are the Brotherhood of the Just. We exist to protect the innocent and punish the cruel. We go where law has failed, where justice has been forgotten." "Vigilantes," Reverend Stone said with disgust. "You're nothing but vigilantes." "Are we?" Elias asked. "Tell me, Reverend, when was the last time you saw justice in this town? When did Sheriff Bradley last arrest someone for beating a defenseless old man? When did the law protect the weak from the strong?" The crowd murmured uneasily. Everyone knew the answer. Justice in Cedar Falls was bought and sold, determined by influence rather than right and wrong. "You want to know who we are?" Elias continued. "We are the answer to the prayers of every person who has been wronged and found no recourse. We are the response to every cry for help that has gone unheard." Sarah stepped forward, her shotgun still in her hands, but pointed at the ground. "What about those of us who tried to help? I gave you water on hot days, let you sleep in my stable when the weather was bad." Elias's expression softened as he looked at her. "Sarah Collins, your kindness was noted, as was Maria Santos's impulse to help, even though she was afraid of what others might think, as was the doctor's wife who left medical supplies where she knew I would find them." "Then why are we all trapped here?" Maria asked. "Because," Gabriel said, "justice is not just about individual acts. It's about the nature of the community. A few kind souls cannot absolve an entire town of its collective cruelty." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of justice are you talking about?" "The kind that fits the crime," Elias replied. "For 3 years, this town has shown me who they really are. They've revealed their true nature through their actions towards someone they perceived as powerless." Sheriff Bradley's nerve finally broke. "This is insane. You can't just ride into a town and what?" Gabriel asked. "Hold people accountable for their actions? Expect basic human decency? You have no authority here." "We have the authority of the wronged," Elias said, "the authority of every person who has been denied justice by corrupt officials and false leaders." The riders began to move again, this time dismounting in unison. They formed a perfect circle around the townspeople, their discipline absolute. Jack noticed that despite their intimidating presence, none of them had drawn weapons. This wasn't about violence, it was about something far more profound. "What happens now?" Jack asked. "Now," Elias said, "we hold court. Each person in this town will face judgment for their actions, not just toward me, but toward everyone they've wronged." "You can't be serious," Reverend Stone protested. "This is America. We have laws, courts, proper procedures." "Do we?" Elias asked. "Tell me, when Mrs. Patterson couldn't pay her rent and was thrown out into the cold, where were your laws then? When the Mexican family was beaten for trying to start a business, where were your proper procedures?" The crowd fell silent. These were events everyone knew about, injustices that had been ignored or covered up. "You see," Gabriel said, "we know everything. Every act of cruelty, every moment of cowardice, every time someone chose comfort over conscience. But also, Elias added, every act of kindness, every moment of courage, every time someone chose to do right despite the cost. Jack felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. "The bread," he said quietly. "That's what triggered this." "The bread was the final test," Elias confirmed. "After 3 years of observing this town's character, I wanted to see if there was any hope left. If even one person could show simple human kindness to someone they perceived as worthless. And if I hadn't," Elias's eyes were sad but resolute, "then this town would have faced the full weight of justice with no hope of redemption." Sarah lowered her shotgun completely. "What kind of redemption are you talking about?" "The kind that comes from truth," Gabriel said, "from facing what you've done and choosing to be better." "And if we refuse?" Sheriff Bradley asked. The riders around them seemed to grow more imposing, their presence alone answering the question. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a reckoning. "Choose wisely," Elias said. "The next few hours will determine not just your fate, but the fate of everyone in Cedar Falls." The sun reached its zenith, casting no shadows in the perfect circle of judgment. The town held its breath, waiting to see what form justice would take. The courthouse of Cedar Falls had never seen such a gathering. The Brotherhood had transformed the main street into an arena of justice, with the riders forming concentric circles around the townspeople. At the center stood Elias, no longer the ragged madman, but revealed as a figure of quiet authority. Captain Gabriel had brought forth a large wooden chair, not a throne, but something that spoke of judgment and gravity. Elias took his place, his deep blue eyes surveying the crowd with the weight of absolute knowledge. "We begin," Elias announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the assembled crowd. Sheriff Bradley was brought forward first, his swagger completely gone. The badge on his chest seemed to mock him now, tarnished and meaningless. "Thomas Bradley," Elias said, his voice steady and clear, "you were entrusted with the protection of this town's people. Instead, you used your position to serve only those who could pay you. You turned a blind eye to injustice and participated in cruelty." Bradley's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. I was just doing my job." "Your job was to protect the innocent," Gabriel said, stepping forward. "Instead, you terrorized them. Mrs. Patterson, the widow who couldn't pay her rent. You threw her possessions into the street in the middle of winter. That wasn't my choice." "It was your choice to do it with such cruelty," Elias interrupted. "To laugh as you did it. To make a public spectacle of her suffering." The crowd murmured, remembering the incident. Mrs. Patterson herself stood among them, her frail form shaking with remembered pain. "The Mexican family who tried to open a shop," Gabriel continued. "You allowed them to be beaten and drove them out of town, not because they broke any law, but because certain influential citizens didn't want competition. I was maintaining order. You were maintaining corruption," Elias said firmly. "Thomas Bradley, you have failed every oath you ever took. You have betrayed the trust of every person in this town." Bradley dropped to his knees, his defiance crumbling. What happens to me?" "You will face the consequences of your actions," Elias said. "But first, you will make amends. You will return every dollar you took in bribes, you will publicly apologize to every person you've wronged, and you will never again hold a position of authority over others." "And if I refuse?" Gabriel's hand moved to his weapon, but Elias raised a hand to stop him. "You won't refuse, Thomas, because deep down you know this is justice." Bradley's shoulders sagged in defeat. The weight of his crimes had finally caught up with him. Next came Reverend Stone, his usual composure shattered. He clutched his Bible, but it seemed to offer no comfort. "Michael Stone," Elias said, "you spoke of God's love while practicing God's judgment. You preached charity while hoarding wealth. You offered salvation while denying redemption. I am a man of God." You are a man who used God's name to control others, Elias corrected. When I needed shelter, you turned me away from the church. When others needed help, you demanded payment. You made religion a business, not a calling. Stone's face crumpled. I tried to serve. You served yourself, Gabriel said. The church's coffers are full while the town's poor go hungry. You live in comfort while preaching about sacrifice. What do you want from me? Stone asked, his voice breaking. Truth, Elias said simply. Admit what you've done. Open the church's doors to all who need shelter. Use the church's wealth to help the poor, not to line your own pockets. One by one, the townspeople were called forward. Each faced the truth of their actions, the weight of their choices laid bare. Some broke down in tears. Others tried to justify their behavior, but all were forced to confront the reality of what they had done. Maria Santos was treated with kindness, her genuine desire to help recognized despite her fears. The doctor's wife was praised for her secret acts of charity. Sarah Collins was acknowledged for her consistent decency in a town that had forgotten what decency meant. But it was Jack's turn that everyone waited for. Jack Morrison, Elias said, his voice warm for the first time that day. You came to this town as a stranger. You owed nothing to anyone here, yet when you saw suffering, you acted. Jack stepped forward, his hat in his hands. I just gave you bread, sir. Nothing more. Nothing more? Elias smiled. You gave me the first kindness I had received in 3 years. You treated me like a human being when everyone else saw me as less than an animal. Any decent person would have done the same. But they didn't, Gabriel said. For 3 years, hundreds of people passed by. They saw the same suffering you saw. They had the same opportunity to help. But only you chose compassion over convenience. Elias stood from his chair and approached Jack. Your simple act of kindness saved this town. Without it, there would have been no hope, no chance for redemption, only justice in its purest, most final form. The implication hung heavy in the air. Jack understood now. His gift of bread had been the thin line between mercy and vengeance. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now, Elias said, this town chooses its future. Those who have admitted their wrongs and committed to change will have that chance. Those who refuse, he gestured to the riders surrounding them, well, justice has many forms. Sheriff Bradley was stripped of his badge and escorted from town. Reverend Stone opened the church doors and began distributing food to the hungry. One by one, the townspeople began to make amends for their past actions. As the sun began to set, the Brotherhood prepared to leave. Their mission in Cedar Falls was complete, not through violence, but through the simple power of accountability. Will you stay? Elias asked Jack. Jack looked around at the town, seeing it with new eyes. I think I might. Seems like this place could use some decent folk. It could indeed, Elias agreed. And you, Jack Morrison, have shown what one person can accomplish with simple human kindness. The riders mounted their horses and began to file out of town, their formation as perfect as their arrival. Captain Gabriel was among the last to leave, nodding respectfully to Jack before disappearing into the gathering darkness. Elias was the final to go. He had changed back into his traveling clothes, but the dignity he had revealed could not be hidden again. He mounted his horse, a magnificent white stallion that had been waiting for him at the edge of town. Remember, he called out to the assembled townspeople, justice is not something that happens to you. It is something you choose to practice every day. As the dust settled and the last rider disappeared into the twilight, Cedar Falls was left to contemplate its future. The town had faced judgment and found redemption, all because one man had chosen to see the humanity in someone society had forgotten. Jack looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. He thought about the strange turn his life had taken, how a simple act of kindness had revealed the true nature of an entire town. Tomorrow, Cedar Falls would begin the long process of becoming what it should have been all along, a place where justice and mercy walked hand in hand. The cowboy had given bread to the town's madman, and in return he had given the town its soul back.